Good morning, Crossroads students. I hope you guys are all doing super well and enjoying the spring with this nice weather. Today, I want to jump into a series of talks that I want to do over the next 3 weeks on the parable of the prodigal son. And some of you are familiar with this story, and some of you might have never heard of this story. And so what I want to do over the next few weeks is go over each character in this story and look at how we might relate to that character and what we can learn from it. So if that sounds good, I'm just going to jump right in and start kind of summarizing this story for those of you who are maybe familiar with it but haven't heard it in a while, or maybe for those who have never heard the story. But Jesus is telling this parable, and he would do that a lot to crowds. He would basically teach, and he would teach in stories, because a lot of us understand stories better than we understand a long message. And so Jesus would teach in stories. And he started teaching this story to his crowd, his audience. And he says this: there was a guy that had 2 sons, and these sons would inherit his wealth when he died, as is normal. If you have a father and he dies and he has money, you'll get that money as an inheritance. It's just kind of the way it works, and that was true back then too. And so this man had 2 sons, and his younger son went to the dad and he said, "Hey, Dad, I know that I'm supposed to get this money when you die, but I kind of want my money now. I kind of want my money before you die, and I want to go off and make my wealth." And so the Bible says that the dad divided the money between the 2, and the younger son went on his way. And he went out and tried to make a living. Now, we don't know too much of what happened when the son left, but we do know that he did not get a job. We do know that he did not invest his money, and if he did, he didn't do it very well. And we do know that he lost everything. And the Bible says he lost everything on riotous living, which basically means Vegas, right? He went off and he hit the bars, and he hit the clubs, and he partied with friends, and soon he found himself penniless. Soon he found himself with nothing at all. And so this son did what a lot of us would think to do. He's like, well, I guess I kind of got to get a job and do something. But at this point, he was broke. He really didn't have much leverage, and so he went to a farmer, and he said, "Hey, can I please work for you for something, for food, for anything?" And this guy was like, "Okay, you can feed my pigs, and whatever they don't eat, you can have." And so this boy, this son, who had set off with a fortune to make his living in the world, now found himself feeding the pigs and eating what the pigs were eating, the scraps and the slops from the table. And that's where the son found himself. And in that moment, this son had this thought. He said, "You know what? The servants in my father's house ate better than this." He's like, "I should definitely go back, and I should ask my dad to be a hired servant, because that makes sense. I can't be a son anymore. I've fallen too far for that, but I can ask my dad for a job, and I can be a hired servant, and he'll give me a bed to sleep in, he'll give me food to eat, and he'll take care of me from then on." And so that's where I want to leave the story today. And next week we'll look at what happens when he goes back to the father. But for the first part of this story, what's crazy to me is how much I can see myself in this prodigal son's story. Because this son, he left willingly, and he decided to go off into the world. He didn't stick with his dad, but he went off into the world, and he spent everything he had, everything that he did, and the situation that he found himself was a situation all of his own. And sometimes we can do the same thing in life. We can think that there's something better out there. There's something different out there. Or maybe you're just falling back into a habit that you've been in before. And maybe you're like, well, I can handle it now. Maybe the son thought he could handle what the world had to offer. Maybe he thought he could handle Vegas. Maybe he thought he could handle hanging out with friends that would steer him in a bad direction. And sometimes we do the same thing. We go off and we do our own thing, and maybe you're straying from what your parents have told you. Maybe you're straying from what you've heard at church and heard Jesus say. and you decide, you know what, I can do my own thing, and I can make it on my own. And you know, every time, whether I have that thought consciously or subconsciously, I always end up back at the metaphorical pig trough, where I'm like, you know what? Things were so much better when I was with my Father. Things were so much better when I was listening to what God had to say. Things were so much better when I was following what God said I should do. Things were so much better. And I think each of us come to a moment when we realize, and sometimes you come to that moment multiple times a year, multiple times a month, maybe even multiple times a week. That moment where you're like, man, I messed up again. But you know what's crazy? Is it's never too late to turn around. And next week I want to look at the Father's response when the Son returns. And so come back next week and we're going to look at how the Father responds. And there's a direct correlation to how our Father in heaven responds when we find ourselves in that same place. So I hope you have a great rest of your week. I hope this was somewhat encouraging and you could pull something from it and maybe learn a little about yourself and how you kind of act. And maybe you've never seen this pattern. Maybe you've never seen like, oh yeah, I do turn away willingly and I do end up at this point. But take this time to learn a little bit about yourself. And next week come back and we're going to look at the Father. But for now, I'll see you guys. Have a great week.